She wiped the table for the third time, even though it was already clean. The night shift always made her tired, but she had to keep moving. The soft jazz music playing through the restaurant speakers felt like a distant dream compared to the noise of clinking glasses, laughter, and sharp voices of customers calling for attention. She tried to stay calm, smiling even when her feet ached, even when her back hurt. Her name tag said Lena, and most people called her that without ever looking into her eyes. Lena had been working at this restaurant for almost 2 years. It was one of the fanciest places in the city, where rich people came to talk about business and show off their success. She had learned how to move quietly, how to speak softly, how to smile when she wanted to cry. Every night she watched people, in fine clothes, eat food that cost more than her entire week's wages. She didn't hate them, but sometimes she wondered if they ever thought about what it felt like to serve instead of being served. When her shift ended, she usually took the long way home, not because she liked walking, but because she passed an old piano shop. Even though it was closed at night, she always stopped there. The piano behind the dusty window was scratched and faded, but it reminded her of what she used to be. She once dreamed of playing music, of studying piano in a real conservatory. She could still remember the feeling of her fingers dancing over the keys, her mother standing beside her, smiling proudly. But all of that ended when her parents died in an accident. After that, life became about survival. She had to take care of her younger brother who was still in school. She gave up her dream because she had to. The world didn't stop for her pain. She found work wherever she could, and when she got the job at this restaurant, she told herself it was good enough. She could still touch music in her heart even if she never touched a piano again. One quiet evening, while she was refilling glasses, she overheard 2 guests at a corner table talking. One of them was a man in a gray suit, clearly someone important. The other was younger, maybe his assistant. The man laughed loudly as he said, "People waste time chasing stupid dreams, music, art, whatever. It's for those who don't know how to make real money." Lena froze for a moment. She wasn't supposed to listen, but his words hit her. She looked down at her tray, pretending to focus. The man continued, "I once met a waiter who said he wanted to be a singer. Can you believe that? Some people don't know their place." The younger man chuckled weakly, unsure how to respond. Lena took a deep breath and walked away before her face showed what she felt. She had heard worse things before, but something about his tone made her chest tighten. She didn't hate him. She just wished people like him understood that dreams were not foolish. They were what kept people like her alive. Later that night, when the restaurant closed, she sat alone near the staff lockers. She pulled out an old, folded paper from her bag. It was a photo of her as a little girl sitting at a piano with her mother beside her. Her mother's hands rested gently on her shoulders. For a moment, Lena smiled. She could almost hear the sound of those early lessons, her mother's voice saying, "Let your heart play, not your fingers." The next day, the restaurant manager told everyone that a very important client would be hosting a private party there in 2 days. Everything had to be perfect: the food, the service, the atmosphere. The client was a millionaire named Mr. Caldwell, known for his wealth and his temper. "Do not make mistakes," the manager warned. "This man notices everything." Lena nodded quietly and went back to her work. She didn't know yet that this man would soon pull her into a night she would never forget. When the night of the event came, the restaurant looked completely different. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandeliers, and the staff wore freshly pressed uniforms. The air was full of perfume and expensive cologne. The guests arrived in shiny cars, stepping out with laughter and pride. Lena tried to stay focused, moving between tables, carrying plates and drinks with careful balance. At the center of the room sat Mr. Caldwell, tall, confident, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. His voice was deep and sharp, cutting through the noise of the party whenever he spoke. He laughed loudly and people laughed with him, even when his jokes weren't funny. It was clear that everyone wanted to stay on his good side. While Lena poured wine at his table, he glanced at her. His eyes were cold but curious. "You've got steady hands," he said. You could be a surgeon, she smiled politely. Thank you, sir. He leaned back in his chair. What's your story then? You're too quiet. Most waitresses talk too much. I just try to do my work well, she said softly. He chuckled. Good answer, but come on. You must have something else going on. You studying something? Got dreams? Lena hesitated. She didn't like talking about herself. Not really, sir. Oh, come now, he said. A young woman like you must have wanted to be something else. She didn't know why she answered honestly, maybe because she was tired of hiding. I used to play piano, she said. Mr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. Piano? Interesting. She's actually good, another waiter whispered nearby. She studied music before she came here. Mr. Caldwell's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Is that so? A hidden talent among the staff. He looked around at his guests. What do you say, everyone? Should we have some music tonight? A few people laughed. Oh yes, that would be entertaining, one woman said, sipping her champagne. Lena froze. Sir, I haven't played in years, she said quickly. Nonsense, he replied, waving his hand. Once, a pianist, always a pianist. We have a grand piano right there. Let's see if you still remember which end makes the sound. The room chuckled. She could feel her face burning. Her heart started pounding in her chest. Please, sir, I really can't, he interrupted her. I'll make you a deal. You play something for us, and I'll tip you a month's salary. Everyone looked at her now. Some were smiling, some waiting for her to fail. Her hands shook slightly. She could refuse, but she needed the money badly. Her brother's school fees were due next week, and she had no idea how to pay them. She nodded slowly. All right, sir. The laughter softened and the crowd turned toward the piano at the corner of the room. It was a glossy black instrument that was usually there just for decoration. Lena walked toward it, feeling hundreds of eyes following her. Every step felt heavy. She could hear whispers. This should be fun. Poor girl. Hope she doesn't mess up. When she sat on the bench, her reflection looked back at her in the piano's surface. Her fingers hovered above the keys. They felt unfamiliar, almost foreign. Her chest tightened as fear crept up her spine. She hadn't touched a piano in so long. What if she forgot everything? She pressed a single key softly. The note echoed across the room, then another. Her breathing slowed. For a moment, she almost wanted to get up and walk away, but then she remembered her mother's voice. Let your heart play, not your fingers. She closed her eyes. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the chandeliers, and then quietly, she began to play. At first, the notes were unsure, like a whisper. A few guests exchanged amused glances, but she didn't stop. The rhythm started to form, gentle and fragile, like a memory coming back to life. Her fingers began to remember the path they once knew so well. The melody grew warmer, clearer. For the first time in years, Lena forgot where she was. The laughter, the lights, the fancy people, they all disappeared. She was back in her small childhood home, sunlight streaming through the window, her mother humming softly beside her. The music wrapped around her like a promise. When the last note faded, Lena opened her eyes. The sound of her heartbeat filled the silence. No one spoke. Mr. Caldwell stared at her, his smirk gone. The silence lasted only a few seconds before someone clapped. Once, then again. Then the room erupted into applause. People who had been waiting to laugh were now standing, clapping with surprise and admiration. Lena blinked in shock. She didn't know what to do. Her hands trembled, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Relief, maybe, or pride. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, his voice quieter now. Not bad, he said, but his tone carried something different, a trace of respect, or maybe confusion. Didn't expect that. Lena stood up and gave a small nod. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She returned to her corner, her heart still racing, her soul still humming the tune she played. The rest of the night passed in a blur. People kept glancing at her, whispering. Some smiled kindly, others looked ashamed of how they had laughed earlier. Lena didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt she had taken back a piece of herself that she thought was lost forever. When she finally left the restaurant, the streets were quiet. The air was cool and soft against her skin. She walked past the piano shop again as she always did, but this time she didn't stop to stare through the glass. She simply smiled and whispered, "I still can play, Mama." The moonlight followed her as she walked home, her steps lighter than they had been in a long time. She didn't know that this night, this strange, painful, beautiful night, was only the beginning of something much bigger waiting for her ahead. When she woke up the next morning, the sound of the piano was still playing in her mind. It wasn't real, of course, but the memory of it stayed with her like a dream that refused to fade. She lay still for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. The early light from the window touched the cracked paint on the wall. For the first time in years, she felt something inside her that wasn't just tiredness. It was quiet joy mixed with disbelief. Her brother was already up, getting ready for school. He smiled when he saw her. "You came home late last night," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "It was a busy night." He looked at her for a moment, sensing there was more to the story. "Did something happen?" Lena thought about telling him everything, the laughter, the humiliation, and how the room had fallen silent when she played. But she only said, "I played piano again." His eyes widened. "You did? After all this time?" She nodded. "Just for a little while." "That's amazing," he said, grinning. "Did people like it?" She smiled faintly. "They did. I think they did." Her brother hugged her before leaving for school. When the door closed, she sat down by the window, sipping a cup of cheap tea. The sunlight felt softer that morning. She didn't know why, but everything around her looked different, brighter somehow. At the restaurant that evening, the atmosphere felt strange. People whispered when she walked by. Some smiled politely, others avoided eye contact. She didn't know what they were thinking, but she could feel that something had changed. The manager called her into the office. "You caused quite a scene last night," he said, though not in an angry way. "Mr. Caldwell called earlier today." Her heart skipped a beat. "He did?" "Yes," the manager said. "He wants to book another event next weekend, and he specifically asked that you be there." She frowned slightly. "Why me?" The manager shrugged. "I suppose he liked your performance. Whatever it was you did, it impressed him." Lena didn't know how to feel about that. Mr. Caldwell had embarrassed her in front of everyone. He made her play because he thought it would be funny. But now he wanted her to come back. Was this another game to him? Or did he really appreciate what she did? She couldn't tell. The week went by slowly. The restaurant prepared for another private event. The kitchen was busier than usual, and everyone wanted to make sure nothing went wrong. But for Lena, each passing day brought more unease. She didn't want to be humiliated again, yet she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. On the night of the event, the restaurant was filled once again with well-dressed guests. The chandeliers sparkled, and the air carried a mix of perfume, laughter, and clinking glasses. Lena tried to keep her focus on her work, staying quiet and polite, but her eyes kept drifting toward the piano at the corner of the room. It stood there silently, almost waiting for her. Mr. Caldwell arrived later than the others. When he walked in, the room seemed to shift around him. His presence demanded attention. He greeted his guests with smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. When he saw Lena, a faint grin crossed his face. "Well, well," he said as she passed by his table. "Our hidden musician. I was wondering if you'd still be here." "I work here, sir," she said simply. He chuckled. "Yes, of course. Tell me, have you been practicing since your little performance?" She shook her head. "No, sir, I don't have a piano." "That's a shame," he said thoughtfully. "Talent like that shouldn't be wasted." She didn't know how to answer. His tone was softer than before, but there was still something unreadable in his eyes. As the evening went on, Lena noticed that some of the guests were the same people from last week's party. A few smiled at her kindly this time, even saying thank you when she served them. It was a small change, but she noticed it. Later in the night, as the mood of the party grew livelier, someone called out jokingly, "Hey, what about another performance from our Waitress pianist?" The room filled with laughter and clapping. Lena froze, feeling that same nervousness she had felt before. Mr. Caldwell raised his hand, silencing the noise. "Not tonight," he said. "She's working." His tone carried authority, and everyone immediately quieted down. He turned toward Lena. "Don't worry," he said quietly. "You've already surprised them once." The rest of the evening went smoothly. No one forced her to play again, and for that she was grateful. But when the night ended and the guests began to leave, Mr. Caldwell stayed behind for a moment. He approached her near the piano. "You really do have something special," he said. "I didn't expect that kind of emotion when you played." "Thank you," she replied softly. He studied her face for a moment. "You trained somewhere, didn't you?" "Yes, when I was younger," she said. "Before my parents passed away." He nodded slowly, as if he finally understood something. "I see." There was a short silence before he spoke again. "If I arranged for you to play at one of my events, not as a waitress, but as a musician, would you do it?" Her heart skipped. "I don't know, sir. I haven't played seriously in years." "Think about it," he said. "You have talent. I could introduce you to people who can help you." She didn't respond right away. It sounded like an opportunity, but she wasn't sure if she could trust him. The same man who once embarrassed her now seemed to be offering her a chance, but why? When she got home that night, she sat by the window again. The city was quiet, and the lights from the nearby buildings shimmered in the distance. She thought about what he said. Part of her wanted to say yes. She missed the feeling of music, the way it made her feel alive. But another part of her was scared. Scared of being laughed at again, of hoping for something that might never come true. The next few days were strange. The restaurant staff treated her differently now. Some were friendly, others distant. One of the cooks told her he had seen a video of her playing at the party on social media. "Someone recorded it," he said. "People are talking about it. They said your playing was beautiful." Lena was shocked. "A video?" "Yeah," he said with a smile. "It's everywhere. People are calling you the Waitress pianist." She didn't know what to think. She wasn't used to attention. She looked it up later on an old phone, and there it was, a short clip of her playing, filmed from across the room. The video wasn't perfect, but the comments were full of kind words. People wrote things like beautiful and pure emotion, and she plays from the heart. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt proud of herself. Maybe her music hadn't disappeared after all. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right moment to return. A week later, she received a call. It was Mr. Caldwell's assistant. "Mr. Caldwell would like you to perform at his charity gala next month," the voice said. "He will take care of everything." Lena didn't know what to say. She hesitated for a long time before finally agreeing. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about finding herself again. The day of the gala arrived quickly. It was held in a grand hall filled with hundreds of guests. Lena stood backstage wearing a simple dress the organizers had provided. Her hands were cold, her heart racing. She hadn't performed for an audience like this before. When the curtains opened and she walked toward the piano, a hush fell over. The crowd, she could feel their eyes on her, but this time it didn't scare her. It felt different. The piano in front of her gleamed under the lights. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes were soft like a whisper, then stronger as the melody grew. The hall was silent except for the sound of her music. Every note carried her story, her loss, her struggle, her hope. When she finished, there was a long pause, and then applause filled the room. Mr. Caldwell stood among the crowd, clapping slowly at first, then smiling. For once, there was no mockery in his eyes. He walked up to her after the performance and said, "You have a gift. You shouldn't hide it." "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded. "You reminded me tonight that not everything in life is about power or money. Sometimes it's about beauty." That night, Lena went home feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for now she knew she had found her way back to the thing she loved most. The piano had always been her voice, and she finally let it speak again. As she lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened. From the humiliation at the restaurant to the applause in the grand hall, it all felt unreal. But she knew it was real because she had lived it. And for the first time in years, she fell asleep with a smile, dreaming not of fear or survival, but of music. The following weeks passed like a quiet dream. Life had changed, yet somehow it still felt the same. Lena still worked at the restaurant, still served tables, and still went home to her small apartment every night. But inside her, something had shifted. The music she thought she had lost was alive again, and people had noticed. The video of her playing at the restaurant had spread more than she imagined. Customers came in asking if she was the waitress who played piano. Some even requested songs, thinking she would play again. She always smiled politely and said she didn't play during work hours, but deep down, she felt proud that people remembered. One evening, while she was serving drinks, the restaurant manager pulled her aside. "You've become quite popular," he said, half amused. "People come here asking about you. You're making this place famous." She laughed softly. "I'm just doing my job." "Maybe," he said, "but you've got something special. Don't waste it." Those words stayed with her for the rest of the night. She didn't want fame or attention, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that her life was moving towards something new. A few days later, Mr. Caldwell called the restaurant and asked to speak with her directly. She was surprised but agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown. She went there after her shift, wearing her simple work clothes, feeling nervous. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. He stood up when he saw her. "I'm glad you came," he said politely. She sat down across from him, still unsure of his intentions. "You wanted to talk to me, sir?" "Yes," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I wanted to thank you for performing at my gala. You made the night unforgettable." "You're welcome," she replied quietly. "I'm glad people enjoyed it." "They didn't just enjoy it," he said. "They were moved. I've had people calling me ever since, asking about you, wanting to know your story." "My story?" she asked, confused. He nodded. "They want to hear more of your music. You have a rare kind of honesty in your playing. It reminds people of something real." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments like that felt too big for her. "I only played what I felt," she said softly. "That's exactly why it works," he said with a small smile. "I've been thinking about something. I'm hosting another event in a few weeks, something more private with artists, business people, and a few music professionals. I'd like you to perform there." Lena looked down at her hands. "I don't know, sir. I'm not a professional anymore." "You don't have to be," he said. "Just be yourself. I'll have everything arranged. You'll be paid well for your time." She hesitated. There was a time when she would have said no immediately, afraid of failing or being laughed at again. But now part of her wanted to do it, not for him, not for the guests, but for herself. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it." He smiled. "Good. You won't regret it." When she left the cafe, she felt both nervous and excited. She hadn't felt that mixture in a long time. She stopped by the piano shop on her way home, staring through the window, as she always did. The old instrument still sat there untouched, but now she felt closer to it somehow, as if it was waiting for her. Over the next few weeks, she practiced whenever she could. The restaurant owner, seeing her dedication, allowed her to use the small upright piano in the back room after closing hours. Every night, after everyone left, she stayed behind, playing quietly until her fingers ached. Sometimes she made mistakes. Sometimes she cried when old memories surfaced, but she always kept going. Her brother would sit nearby, listening with admiration. "You sound better every day," he said one night. "I'm trying," she said, smiling tiredly. "You don't need to try," he replied. "You already have it." His faith in her made her stronger. When the night of the private event finally arrived, she felt ready. The gathering was held at a mansion outside the city. When she arrived, she was greeted warmly by Mr. Caldwell's assistant and led into a beautiful hall filled with soft golden light. The piano was placed near a wide window overlooking a garden. Guests mingled with glasses in their hands, talking in quiet voices. She recognized a few faces from newspapers, business leaders, artists, musicians. She felt small among them, but she reminded herself that she wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to play. Mr. Caldwell approached her before the performance began. "Just play what feels right," he said. "Don't think about the people watching." She nodded. "I'll try." When it was time, she walked to the piano. The conversations faded and the room grew silent. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The music began softly, like a quiet voice speaking for the first time. It wasn't a famous piece, just something she had been working on alone, something born from her heart. The melody rose and fell gently, full of emotion and memory. The room seemed to breathe with her. As she played, she saw faint reflections in the window. People standing still, listening intently. Some had closed their eyes, others simply watched her hands. For those few minutes, the world outside disappeared. When the final note faded, there was a long silence. Then the applause came, soft at first, then louder, warmer, full of genuine admiration. Lena stood up, her face flushed, her hands trembling. She didn't know how to react. She looked toward Mr. Caldwell, who nodded with quiet pride. After the event, several guests approached her, introducing themselves, praising her performance. One of them was a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as a music teacher. "You have real talent," she said kindly. "Not just skill, but feeling. I teach at a small music school. If you ever want to continue your training, I'd be happy to help you." Lena thanked her sincerely. She couldn't believe what was happening. A few months ago, she was just a waitress trying to survive. Now, people were talking to her like she belonged in their world. As the night went on, she noticed that Mr. Caldwell seemed different too. He wasn't showing off or making jokes like before. He spoke to people calmly, even smiled genuinely a few times. When the event ended, he found her near the entrance. "You did wonderful," he said. "I think you reminded everyone tonight what sincerity looks like." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she said. He shook his head. "I should be thanking you. You've changed the way I see things. I used to think music was just noise people paid for, but when you play, it's something else." She smiled gently. "Music speaks when words can't." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's true." As she left the mansion, the cool night air brushed against her face. She walked slowly down the quiet road, feeling peaceful. The stars above were bright, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was walking toward a future that belonged to her. The next morning, she received a call from the music teacher she had met. "I meant what I said," the woman told. "You have potential. I'd like to help you prepare for an audition. There's a community concert next month. It could open doors for you." Lena hesitated only a moment before agreeing. It scared her, but she knew she had to take the chance. Over the next weeks, she worked harder than ever. She practiced before work, after work, sometimes late into the night. Her fingers hurt, but she didn't stop. The music teacher guided her, patiently, helping her regain the discipline she once had. Meanwhile, word about her began to spread even more. Customers kept asking about her at the restaurant. Some recognized her from the new events photos that appeared in local newspapers. She tried to stay humble, still doing her job with the same quiet smile. One evening, the restaurant owner pulled her aside again. "You're becoming famous," he said with a grin. "Soon you'll forget all about us." "I'll never forget this place," she said. "This is where everything started again." When the day of the community concert arrived, she was nervous but ready. It was held in a small auditorium filled with families, students, and a few local journalists. She wore a simple dress and walked onto the stage with calm determination. As she sat at the piano, she thought about everything that had brought her there, the long nights, the humiliation, the hope, and the rediscovery of her music. Then she began to play. The melody filled the room, soft at first, then stronger, fuller. Each note carried a piece of her story. The crowd listened quietly, caught in the beauty of her performance. When she finished, the applause was warm and long. Some people stood, clapping with emotion. Lena smiled through tears. She didn't care about fame or money. All she cared about was that she had shared something real. After the concert, as she packed her things, she saw Mr. Caldwell standing near the back of the hall. He hadn't told her he would come, but there he was, smiling faintly. "You did it again," he said when she approached. "You moved everyone." "I just played," she said softly. "No," he replied. "You reminded them what heart looks like." She didn't know what to say. She only smiled, grateful and humble. That night, as she walked home under the stars, she felt that her journey was far from over. But for the first time, she was not afraid. Whatever came next, she would face it with music in her heart. The sound of the piano filled the room. Soft at first, like a whisper trying to be heard through the noise of the world. Then it began to grow, gaining life, as if each note carried a piece of her soul. The people who had been laughing only minutes ago were now still, their eyes fixed on her. It was as if time had slowed down, and every breath in the room belonged to her music. The waitress, with her plain uniform and tired hands, was no longer the invisible girl who served food and drinks. She had become something else, something larger than anyone in that grand hall could define. The air around her seemed to shimmer with emotion. Her fingers moved faster now, gliding over the keys like they had been waiting their whole life for this moment. The sound was pure and deep, filled with a kind of sadness that made people hold their breath. The melody told a story without words. It spoke of quiet nights working double shifts, of lost dreams, of a girl who once believed she could touch the world with music, but was forced to trade that dream for survival. The music carried her pain, but also her strength. It was the sound of a heart refusing to break. The guests sat frozen. The woman in the silver dress, who had whispered something rude earlier, now held her glass still in her hand, afraid to make a sound. The man beside her forgot to smile. Even the waiters at the back stopped what they were doing, drawn by something they could not explain. At the far end of the hall, the millionaire who had forced her to play stood completely still. His confident smile had faded, replaced by a strange look of confusion. He had wanted to make her a joke, a small moment of entertainment at his expensive party. But now he felt something he could not name. The sound of her music went deeper than pride or money. It was something pure, something that made even him feel small. The piece changed again. Her hands moved softly now, like they were touching something fragile. The notes became gentle and light, filled with warmth. It was as if she was remembering something beautiful. In her mind, she saw her mother's face, smiling from the old wooden chair by the piano. Her voice sang softly, "Don't be afraid. Let the music tell your heart's truth." She blinked away a tear but didn't stop. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her eyes half closed. The sound seemed to come not from her fingers, but from somewhere inside her chest. Every note spoke louder than words ever could. People who had come to eat, drink, and laugh now sat completely still, feeling something deep inside themselves they didn't expect to feel. One of the guests, a woman with kind eyes, covered her, mouth as tears filled her eyes. She had played piano as a child but had given it up to follow her family's wishes. Now hearing this young woman play, she felt something in her heart come alive again. The sound rose higher, the melody blooming like light breaking through dark clouds. It wasn't just skill. It was emotion, honesty, and courage. It was the kind of beauty that could not be bought or faked. Every mistake she had ever made, every long night she had endured, all of it became part of the music. Her hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of emotion. She didn't see the crowd anymore. She didn't see the grand chandelier above her or the rich faces around her. In her mind, she was a little girl again, sitting on a small stool in a warm kitchen, playing the piano her parents had saved so hard to buy. She remembered her father clapping softly and her mother humming along. The memory made her heart ache, but she let that ache flow into her music. The millionaire shifted uncomfortably. His guests had stopped pretending. No one looked at him anymore. Their eyes were on her, this waitress who had turned his cruel trick into something powerful and unforgettable. He realized that in trying to embarrass her, he had exposed something shameful in himself. He looked down, his jaw tight, trying to hide the regret growing in his chest. As the final part of her piece came, the music slowed again. It became soft and full of hope like a promise. The sound wrapped around everyone like a gentle wind. Even the waiters near the doors had tears in their eyes. When the last note finally fell, it didn't end sharply. It faded slowly like a sigh, leaving silence so deep that no one dared to move. For a few seconds there was nothing but stillness. Then, as if waking from a dream, someone began to clap. Another followed. Then another. And suddenly the entire hall filled with applause. People stood up, cheering, clapping, calling her name even though most of them didn't know it. The sound of their praise filled the room, but she didn't smile. She simply sat there, breathing, her heart still racing from the music. The millionaire stepped forward, his voice unsure now. "That was, unexpected," he said, trying to sound calm. But his words felt small compared to what everyone had just witnessed. The applause continued, ignoring him. The woman in the silver dress stood up and walked toward the pianist. "That was beautiful," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You reminded me why I loved music." The waitress looked up at her, eyes still wet. She didn't know what to say. A man near the back shouted, "Play again." But she shook, her head gently. "No," she said in a quiet voice. "That's enough." The millionaire tried to speak again, forcing a smile. "You've got talent. I can help you if you want. I know people. You could play at my events, make good money." But she only looked at him for a moment and said, "I didn't play for money. I played because I had to." Her voice was calm but firm. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he had nothing clever to say. Around him, the guests whispered, some looking at him with disapproval. The power in the room had shifted. It no longer belonged to him. The waitress stood up slowly, her knees still weak. She bowed slightly and turned to leave. As she walked back toward the kitchen, people reached out to touch her hand or thank her. She smiled politely but said nothing. Inside, her heart was still full. When she reached the back of the restaurant, one of her co-workers ran up to her, eyes wide. "That was incredible," he whispered. "I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled softly. "Neither. Did they?" she said. She changed out of her uniform and sat alone in the staff room for a while. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear anymore, but from something lighter. Relief, maybe, or joy. For the first time in a long time, she had done something for herself. She had let the world see who she really was. Out in the hall, the guests were still talking about her performance. The woman in the silver dress said she wanted to find out more about her, maybe help her get noticed. A man who taught music at a nearby academy was already asking the restaurant manager for her contact information. The millionaire sat in silence, staring at the empty piano. The laughter, the attention, The control he once had over the room, everything, had vanished the moment she started playing. He realized how small his pride looked compared to the beauty of what she had shared. For a long time, he didn't move. He just listened to the faint echoes of the notes still hanging in the air, and something inside him shifted. He had spent his life chasing respect, power, and money, but none of those things had ever made him feel the way that simple melody had. It made him question who he had become. Meanwhile, the waitress walked home in the cool night air. The city, lights reflected on the wet pavement, and she breathed deeply, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in years. She didn't know what would happen next, but for now that didn't matter. She had faced her fear. She had turned humiliation into strength. As she crossed the quiet street, she thought of her mother again. "You did it," she whispered softly, into the night. "You'd be proud of me." At home, her little brother was asleep on the couch, the television still playing softly in the background. She smiled and covered him with a blanket. Then she sat by the small electric keyboard she kept by the window. It was old and missing a few keys, but when she touched it, it still felt like home. Her fingers moved slowly over the keys, playing a soft tune, almost like a lullaby. Outside, the city noise faded into the distance. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She didn't need applause or fancy halls. All she needed was the music and the courage to let it speak. And somewhere, far away, in a large house filled with silence, the millionaire sat alone, replaying the sound of her performance in his head. He didn't understand why it haunted him, but he couldn't forget it. Something inside him told him that night had changed not just her life, but his too. The night after the party was quieter than usual. The grand hall that had once echoed with laughter and the sound of glasses now felt empty. The people had gone home, but the feeling her music had left behind still lingered in the air like the last note of a song that refused to fade. The waiters cleaned in silence, each one still thinking about the girl who had turned a cruel joke into something unforgettable. Even they moved differently that night, almost softer, as if the music had touched them too. The millionaire sat alone, at one of the long tables, a glass of water untouched beside him. He had told everyone else to go. For the first time in many years, he didn't want company or noise. His thoughts were loud enough. He stared at the empty piano across the room, remembering how confident he had felt just hours before. He had planned to humiliate a waitress for amusement, to show off his power in front of his guests. He had expected laughter and applause for himself. But instead, all the attention, all the admiration had gone to her. He took a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. The image of her playing, eyes closed, hands trembling yet strong, would not leave his mind. There had been something pure in it, something honest that money couldn't buy. He felt a strange kind of shame crawl into his chest. He was a man who had built his life on control, controlling people, situations, and appearances. But that night, he had been the one exposed. While he sat there lost in thought, the restaurant manager walked in quietly. "Sir, everyone has gone home," the manager said gently. "Shall I close up?" The millionaire nodded, but then stopped him. "That girl?" he said slowly, his voice rough. "Do you know her name?" "Yes, sir," the manager replied. "She's one of our part-time waitresses. Comes in 3 nights a week. Hard worker, never complains. Her name is—" The millionaire raised his hand to stop him. "That's enough," he said. "You can go now." The manager hesitated, then left quietly, leaving the man alone with his thoughts. He sat there for a long time, replaying every detail in his head. The way she had looked when he called her up to play, the nervous way she had sat at the piano, the laughter of his guests. And then that transformation, the moment the first real notes filled the air and everything changed. It had been more than music. It had been truth, raw and fearless, and he had almost destroyed it for sport. He rubbed his face with his hands, feeling tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. For the first time, he realized how empty his world had become. His house was full of things, but silent. His life was full of people but lonely. And yet that girl, with nothing but a waitress uniform and a piano, had more grace in her than he had ever known. The next day, the story spread through whispers and small talks. People who had been at the party couldn't stop talking about what they had seen. The video one of the guests had recorded was quietly shared online. It wasn't meant to embarrass her. It was because people were moved by it. The clip showed her playing with such feeling that even strangers watching from their phones felt something deep inside. Comments poured in, calling her performance real, haunting, beautiful. Back at the restaurant, the girl came in for her next shift as usual. Her coworkers greeted her with wide eyes and quiet smiles. "You've gone viral," one of them whispered excitedly, showing her the video on his phone. She watched for a moment, her heart beating fast. It felt strange seeing herself like that, sitting at the piano with everyone watching. She smiled shyly and handed the phone back. "I didn't do it for fame," she said softly. Her friend grinned. "Doesn't matter. You deserve it." That night, customers came in asking about her. Some just wanted to see the piano waitress. A few even requested she play again, but she politely refused. She wasn't ready for that yet. Her hands still trembled when she thought about it. Late that evening, as she was finishing her shift, the millionaire walked in quietly. He didn't bring his usual group of friends or his loud laughter. He came alone. The staff looked nervous, unsure of what he would say or do. She saw him and froze for a moment, unsure how to react. He walked up to her slowly, holding a small envelope in his hand. "I came to apologize," he said in a low voice. The restaurant went completely silent. She looked at him, surprised. "You don't need to," she said gently. "Yes, I do," he replied. "What I did was cruel. I thought it would be funny to embarrass you. I was wrong. You showed me something I didn't expect. You reminded me that money isn't power. Character is." He placed the envelope on the counter. "Inside is a check. I don't want you to think it's payment, it's a scholarship. I made some calls. There's a music institute that would be lucky to have you. They'll cover your lessons, your fees, everything. You have a gift. Don't waste it." She stared at the envelope, unsure what to say. "I can't take your money," she said quietly. "I didn't play to get anything." "I know," he said. "That's why you deserve it." There was something different in his voice now, something sincere. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said finally. "Not for the money. For listening." He gave a small smile, one that looked almost human, then turned and walked out. The door closed softly behind him, leaving her standing there with the envelope still untouched. Over the next few weeks, her life began to change in small but meaningful ways. The video kept spreading, and people began reaching out to her. A local pianist invited her to perform at a small charity event. She was nervous, but she agreed. When she stepped onto the stage again, the lights felt warm instead of frightening. Her fingers trembled only for a moment before finding their rhythm. This time, there was no humiliation, no wealthy crowd waiting for her to fail. Just people who wanted to listen. When she finished, the applause wasn't loud or grand, it was honest. She smiled for the first time in a long while, not because she wanted approval, but because she had found her voice again. Meanwhile, the millionaire began changing too. He stopped throwing parties for attention. He began spending time at a local community center, sponsoring music programs for underprivileged children. He never told anyone why, but sometimes when he visited the center and saw the kids playing simple tunes on old keyboards, he would close his eyes and hear that same melody from the restaurant, and he would smile quietly. Months passed. The waitress, no longer just a waitress, enrolled in the music program the scholarship had given her. Her brother was proud of her, though he didn't always understand how much courage it took. He told her one night, "You looked like you were flying when you played that night." She laughed softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Maybe I was," she said. She practiced every day after work. Her hands grew stronger again, her confidence slowly returning. The teachers at the institute were impressed by her natural talent and emotion. They said she played like someone who had lived 1,000 lives. She smiled but didn't explain. Music was her way of speaking the things she couldn't say out loud. One evening after practice, she walked past the same restaurant where it all began. Through the window, she saw the piano still sitting there, untouched since that night. For a moment, she stood outside remembering everything, the fear, the laughter, the silence, the applause. Then she smiled and walked away. That part of her story was over. Life didn't suddenly become easy. She still worked part-time to support her brother, still faced long nights and tired mornings. But now, she had something more. A purpose. The world had seen her once, and that was enough to remind her that dreams never really die. They just wait for the right moment to be heard again. As the months turned into a year, she played her first official recital at a small concert hall. The room was filled with students, teachers, and a few familiar faces from the restaurant. At the back, quietly sitting among the crowd, was the millionaire. He didn't want recognition or thanks. He just wanted to listen. When she sat at the piano, she took a deep breath. The stage lights shone softly on her face. She looked out into the crowd and saw her brother smiling proudly. Then she began to play. The music was calm, graceful, full of hope. It told the story of a girl who had been invisible, who had been mocked, but who found her strength through the very thing people tried to take from her. Every note was a piece of her journey: pain, courage, forgiveness, and freedom. The audience listened in silence, just like that night at the party. But this time, there was no shame, no tension, only admiration. And when she finished, the applause came not as a surprise, but as something earned. The millionaire stood up and clapped quietly, a small smile on his face. He didn't approach her afterward, didn't try to take credit. He simply walked out into the night, feeling lighter than he had in years. She sat for a while at the piano after everyone had left, her hands resting gently on the keys. The hall was empty, but she didn't feel alone. The music had given her everything she needed: a voice, a purpose, and a way to heal. Outside, the night air was cool. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't clear who she was thanking: the world, fate, or maybe her mother. But it didn't matter. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, but she still remembered that night like it had just happened. The sound of her own music still echoed in her mind, not as a memory of fear or humiliation, but as a moment that changed her life. She had walked into that restaurant as a tired waitress with a hidden dream, and walked out as someone who had finally found her voice. Now, her days were filled with music. Every morning, she practiced before going to work. Her fingers moved over the keys with more confidence than ever before. She no longer played to prove anything. She played because it made her feel alive. It was her way of speaking to the world, of saying everything she never had the courage to say out loud. Her little brother watched her with quiet admiration. Sometimes he would sit beside her and listen for hours, his head resting on the edge of the piano. He didn't always understand the music, but he understood what it did to her. It made her eyes shine again. It made her smile for no reason. It made her believe in life again. One evening, as they were eating dinner, he said softly, "You should play for more people. Everyone should hear you." She smiled, shaking her head. "Maybe someday," she said. But someday came sooner than she thought. The music teacher from the institute approached her after one of her lessons. "There's a recital coming up," he said. "A big one. Students from all over the city will perform. You should be part of it." Her heart skipped a beat. The idea of standing in front of so many people scared her, but there was also a spark of excitement in her chest. "Do you really think I'm ready?" she asked. He smiled. "You've been ready for a long time." That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about it. The last time she had played in front of a large crowd, it had been by force, out of humiliation. This time it would be by choice. That thought made her heart feel light. Over the next few weeks, she practiced harder than ever. Her hands ached, but she didn't care. She poured her heart into every note. The melody she chose wasn't a famous piece or something flashy. It was her own composition. It told her story, from the pain of losing her parents, to the long nights at the restaurant, to the moment she sat at the piano and changed her life. The night of the recital arrived. The hall was filled with people. Families, friends, teachers, and strangers sat waiting for the performances to begin. Her brother sat in the front row, his eyes wide with pride. She could see him waving softly at her from where she stood backstage. Her hands were cold and her heart raced, but she took a deep breath. This time, she wasn't afraid of being judged. She wasn't trying to please anyone. She just wanted to share her story. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, but she didn't flinch. She walked slowly to the piano and sat down. For a moment, she looked out at the audience. She saw faces she didn't know, but she also saw the music teacher who had believed in her. And in the very back, almost hidden in the shadows, she thought she saw the man who had once tried to humiliate her, the millionaire. He sat quietly, his hands folded, his eyes soft with respect. She turned back to the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The music started gently, like a whisper of memory. Each note felt like a piece of her past being set free. The sound filled the hall, soft at first, then growing stronger. People leaned forward, drawn to the emotion in her playing. It wasn't perfect. There were small mistakes, tiny pauses, but none of that mattered. The music had something more important: heart. As she played, her story unfolded through the keys. The sadness of her childhood, the struggles of working long hours, the loneliness, the humiliation, all of it was there. But so was the strength, the courage, and the light she had found. The melody rose higher, full of hope and forgiveness. Tears glistened in the eyes of many in the audience. They could feel what she felt. They didn't just hear the notes, they felt her journey. The boy in the front row smiled proudly, his eyes shining. When she reached the final part of her piece, the sound became soft again, like the closing of a chapter. The last note lingered in the air, trembling, then faded into silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began. It started small and grew louder, filling the hall. People stood up, clapping, cheering. She looked out, her heart full, and bowed slightly. Her eyes met the millionaire's for a brief moment. He nodded at her, not as a man above her, but as someone humbled, someone grateful. She smiled softly, then turned back to the crowd. After the recital, people came up to her to congratulate her. Some asked about her music, others just wanted to thank her for touching their hearts. Her brother hugged her tightly, his voice trembling. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." She laughed through her tears. "We did it," she said. "Both of us." In the weeks that followed, her performance was talked about all over town. She was invited to perform at small events and even on local television. She never acted proud or distant. She remained the same kind, humble person she had always been. But inside, she felt stronger. Every time she sat at a piano now, she remembered the girl she used to be, the one who was too afraid to be seen, and she silently promised never to hide again. The millionaire, on the other hand, kept his distance, but he continued to help others quietly. He funded music programs in her name and made sure the restaurant staff received better pay. He had learned something that night that no amount of money could ever buy: respect for people, no matter where they came from. Sometimes, late at night, he would listen to her music recordings online. The sound brought him peace. It reminded him that even when you make mistakes, you can still change, still find light. A year later, she was invited to perform at a large concert hall in another city. It was her biggest audience yet. She traveled, with her brother, both excited and nervous. As they walked through the empty stage before the performance, she ran her fingers along the piano keys. The stage lights were bright, but they didn't scare her anymore. Her brother smiled at her. "Do you ever get tired of this?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "Because every time I play, I remember why I started." That night, the hall was filled to the last seat. When she began to play, the room fell silent. Her music was no longer just a story of pain. It was a story of hope, of how one act of cruelty had been turned into something beautiful. Her performance touched everyone who listened. Some people cried quietly. Others closed their eyes, letting the music carry them somewhere peaceful. When it ended, the applause lasted for a long time. Reporters wrote about her talent, but what impressed them most was her humility. She didn't talk about fame or success. She talked about her family, her struggles, and how music had saved her. After the show, she stood outside the hall, looking up at the stars. Her brother came up beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled. "About how life changes when you stop running from who you are," she said. He nodded quietly, holding her hand. They walked home together, the night calm and full of light. Years later, her name became known in the world of music. She played in cities far and wide, but she never forgot where it all began. In that restaurant, on that night when a cruel dare turned into destiny. She often visited her old workplace not to show off, but to sit at the same piano and play softly, just for herself. The waiters would stop and listen, smiling, remembering the night everything changed. Her story inspired many. People who had given up on their dreams found courage again after hearing about her. Young musicians looked up to her not because she was perfect, but because she was real. One afternoon she received a letter. It was from the Millionaire. His handwriting was neat but shaky. He wrote about how her music had changed the way he saw the world. He thanked her for teaching him humility, for reminding him that true worth is not measured by wealth but by kindness and honesty. At the end of the letter he wrote, "I hope your music continues to heal others the way it healed me." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her piano bench. Every time she opened it, she would see his words and remember how far she had come. One evening, during a small charity concert, she told the audience, "Music has a strange power. It doesn't just fill silence, it changes hearts. It changed mine. It taught me that no matter how small you feel, your voice can still be heard if you have the courage to use it." The crowd listened, quiet and moved. When she sat down to play, her hands were steady and sure. The melody flowed softly, filling the room with peace. Somewhere in the audience, her brother smiled proudly, his eyes shining. And as the final notes faded, she looked up, her heart light. She wasn't the waitress who once hid her dreams anymore. She was the woman who turned her pain into music, her silence into strength, her humiliation into beauty. The applause rose, again warm and genuine, echoing through the hall like a heartbeat. She bowed slightly, then smiled through the soft light of the stage. It was the same smile she had worn that first night, the smile of someone who had finally found where she belonged.